The clock on the wall does not just tick, it keeps a ledger. At 3 in the morning, the world outside is wrapped in a heavy, indifferent blanket of darkness, but inside this room, the floodlights of memory are turned all the way up. There is a strange kind of gravity to these hours. It is the time when the noise of the day finally collapses, leaving behind an unobstructed view of every misstep, every awkward silence, and every poor decision you wish you could snatch back from the jaws of time. You lie there staring at the ceiling, tracing the invisible cracks in the plaster, convinced that if you just replay the tape one more time, you might finally figure out where it all went wrong. But you are not analyzing the past to learn from it, you are reviewing the evidence for a trial where you are simultaneously the defendant, the prosecutor, and the executioner. It is a quiet courtroom, devoid of a jury, where the verdict was written long before you closed your eyes. We carry these invisible indictments around like heavy stones in our pockets, growing so accustomed to the drag that we forget what it feels like to walk unburdened. By day, you wear the armor of competence. You answer emails with polite precision, nod in meetings with the required degree of engagement, and offer a half-smile when someone asks how you are doing. You are functional, polite, and entirely present on the surface. Yet, underneath that veneer, a parallel life is running on a loop. It is a theater of shadows where every past failure is magnified, stripped of context, and polished into a shining monument of your own inadequacy. That awkward thing you said 3 years ago at a dinner party? Replayed. That project where you missed the mark because you were drowning in exhaustion? Analyzed down to the exact syllable. You treat your own mistakes not as accidental drops along a winding path, but as definitive proof of a flawed character. You cross-examine yourself relentlessly, asking questions that have no answers, searching for a phantom redemption that feels permanently out of reach. The exhaustion of this state is unlike any physical tiredness. It is an internal erosion, a slow wearing down of the spirit caused by the friction of endless second-guessing. Overthinking wears the disguise of productivity. It whispers that if you just think about it hard enough, long enough, and deeply enough, you will somehow rewrite history or undo the sting of embarrassment. But history is stubborn. It refuses to bend to the will of your midnight regret. Instead, the mind builds labyrinthine corridors of what-ifs and if-onlys, trapping you in a maze of your own design. You remember the exact tone of voice someone used when they looked at you with disappointment, or worse, with pity. You weaponize their glances against yourself, turning fleeting human moments into permanent tattoos of failure. Every silence from a friend is interpreted as rejection, every delayed text is catalogued as evidence of your fading relevance. You become an expert in detecting threats that exist only in the museum of your anxieties. What makes this self-inflicted imprisonment so cruel is its absolute invisibility. To anyone looking at you from the outside, you are simply resting, perhaps just a bit quiet, lost in thought. They cannot see the microscopic dissection of your worth happening behind your eyelids. They cannot hear the internal voice shouting accusations that no one else is making. You have become so skilled at hiding the turmoil that the silence itself feels like a lie, yet speaking the truth feels like admitting a weakness you cannot afford to show. So you stay silent, letting the night stretch wider, feeding the fire of your own regret with dry twigs of memory. You convince yourself that this suffering is a form of penance, a necessary tax for having lived imperfectly. If you punish yourself enough for the past, perhaps you can prevent future pain, or so the logic of anxiety goes. Yet, the irony of the white nights is that the harder you try to punish yourself into perfection, the further you drift from the person you are trying to redeem. The self you are attacking is a ghost, a compilation of outdated versions of you who did the best they could with the limited grace and knowledge they possessed at the time. You judge your past self with the harsh wisdom of hindsight, as if you should have known then what you only discovered through the wreckage of experience. It is a rigged game, an impossible standard designed to ensure you never win your own forgiveness. You spend hours negotiating with ghosts, offering silent apologies to rooms that are empty, trying to settle debts that no one else is even keeping track of. The weight of these self-made chains presses against your chest, turning breathing into a conscious, heavy effort while the rest of the world sleeps on, entirely undisturbed by your internal tempest. As the first pale smear of dawn begins to bleed through the edges of the curtains, a strange shift occurs. The urgency of the midnight trial starts to fade, replaced not by peace, but by a hollow, drained exhaustion. The frantic calculations slow down, leaving behind a quiet realization that is both heavy and liberating. The court is adjourned, not because justice was served, or because a verdict was reached, but simply because the dawn does not care about your guilt. The light reveals the dust motes dancing in the quiet room, highlighting the ordinary walls that witnessed your private war. You realize that the prosecutor in your head was never an authority of truth, it was simply a terrified part of you, desperately trying to make sense of vulnerability by turning it into blame. The night is over, and while the ledger remains, the realization settles in that you are the only one holding the pen. You serve a life sentence in a prison. Where you locked the door from the inside.